I knew something had shifted the moment my son-in-law walked past me in the hallway without a word, not a glance, not a nod, just the sound of his loafers on the hardwood and the faint smell of his aftershave as he disappeared into the kitchen that used to be mine. I stood there for a second, holding a basket of laundry I had just folded, his shirts mostly, and I thought, when did this become normal? My name is Olivia. I am 64 years old. I spent 31 years as an administrative coordinator at a hospital in Columbus, Ohio. I raised 2 children mostly on my own after my husband Leonard passed from a heart attack when our daughter Faye was 9 and our son was 11. I paid off a mortgage. I kept the lights on. I never once asked anyone for anything I hadn't earned. So I want you to understand who I was before I tell you what happened to me. Because what happened? It didn't happen to a weak woman. It happened to a woman who loved too carefully, gave too quietly, and waited too long to remember that she mattered too. It started the way these things always do, not with a fight, not with anything dramatic. It started with a favor. Faye called me on a Tuesday in March, 3 years ago. She was crying before she even said hello, which was not unusual for Faye. My daughter has always felt things deeply. Her father's trait, I used to say. She told me that she and her husband Brendan were behind on their mortgage, 2 months behind. She said the bank had sent a notice. She said she didn't know what to do. I asked her how much. She told me. I didn't hesitate. I had savings, not a fortune, but enough. Money I had been careful with for years. A nest egg I had built slowly, the way you do when no one is handing you anything. I transferred the money that same afternoon. Faye called me back, still crying, but differently. She said, "Mom, I don't know what we'd do without you." I told her not to worry about it. That's what mothers say. What I did not know, what I could not have known, was that not worrying about it was exactly the permission they needed to keep asking. By summer, Brendan had lost his job, or so he said. He had been in sales, some kind of medical equipment company, and he said the territory had been restructured. He was home when I called. He was home when Faye called me. He was home, it seemed, most of the time. Faye asked if I would help with groceries, just for a month or 2. I said of course. 2 months turned into 4. 4 turned into 8. Then Faye called and asked something different. She asked if I would consider selling my house and moving in with them. I want to be honest, my first feeling was warmth. I had been alone in that house since my son moved to Phoenix 5 years earlier. Some evenings, the quiet pressed against me in a way that felt less like peace and more like something I was enduring. And my granddaughter, Faye and Brendan's little girl, Rosie, who was 5 at the time, I adored her. She called me Grandma Liv and once told me, with total seriousness, that my potato soup was better than anything in the whole universe. So yes, my first feeling was warmth. Faye laid it out practically. If I sold my house, I could help them pay off the rest of their mortgage, and then we'd all live together, and we'd split household expenses, and I'd be close to Rosie. And it made sense, she said. It really made sense. I thought about it for 6 weeks. I called my son in Phoenix. His name is Gregory, and he had reservations. He said, "Mom, are you sure about this?" "Brendan's not exactly." He paused. "I just want you to be sure." I told him I was sure. I sold the house I had lived in for 22 years. I got a fair price. I handed over a significant portion of that money to pay off the remainder of Faye and Brendan's mortgage. Then I moved into their guest room with 2 suitcases and a box of books and a small lamp that had been in my bedroom since 1987, the one with the cream-colored shade that Leonard had picked out. I told myself this was a new chapter. The guest room was fine. Small but fine. It had a window that looked out onto the side yard, and in the morning I could hear the birds before anything else, and that was something. The first few weeks were good. Faye cooked dinner most nights, and we'd all sit together, and Rosie would tell us about her day at kindergarten in that breathless way children do, jumping from one thing to the next without any particular logic, and I would sit there feeling genuinely lucky. Brendan was polite, distant, but polite. Then, sometime around the second month, things began to change in ways I couldn't quite name at first. Small things. Faye started buying different food. There were specialty items, a particular kind of imported pasta, certain cheeses from a deli across town, a brand of steak that cost more per pound than I used to spend on a week of groceries. I didn't say anything. It wasn't my place to comment on what they bought. But I noticed that when dinner was served, those meals were for Faye and Brendan. For me, there was usually something set aside. Leftovers from the night before, reheated, or a smaller portion of whatever was being made, the part that had dried out or cooled in the pan. The first time it happened, I thought it was an accident. The second time, I thought maybe I was imagining it. The third time, I watched Brendan cut into a ribeye at the table, while Faye set a plate in front of me with reheated pasta from 2 days prior, still in the container it had been stored in, with a fork balanced on top. I did not say anything. I picked up the fork. I ate the pasta. But something settled into me that night. A slow, clear understanding, the kind that doesn't announce itself. It just arrives and waits. Brendan had found work again by then, some new sales position. He wasn't making what he used to, he said, but he was bringing in income, and yet the requests continued. The electric bill, the car insurance, Faye's, and then somehow also Brendan's, an HOA fee that was apparently past due, a registration renewal. I was never asked directly, not in a formal way. It was always presented sideways. Faye would mention in a tired voice that things were tight this month, and I would offer, because I was living in their home and it felt like the right thing to do. I kept a small notebook in my nightstand drawer, not for any particular reason at first, just a habit from years of keeping organized at work. But around month 4, I started writing things down, dates, amounts, what it was for. By month 6, I had given them in various forms, between the original mortgage payment, the house equity, and ongoing monthly contributions. More than I want to say here. Enough that when I looked at my savings account balance one morning, I had to read the number twice. I sat at the small desk in my guest room with my reading glasses on and my coffee going cold. And I looked at that number for a long time. Then I closed the laptop and went out to the kitchen to help Rosie with her cereal, because she liked when I drew a little smiley face in the milk with a spoon before she stirred it. Some things you keep going for. The moment that finally cracked something open happened on a Friday evening in November. Faye and Brendan were going out to dinner. A nice place. I had heard Brendan mention the name. A steakhouse downtown that I knew was not inexpensive. Rosie was staying home with me, which I was happy about. We had plans. Rosie wanted to make cookies. Before they left, Faye came into the kitchen where I was getting down the flour, and she said almost casually that she had given Brendan's mother my phone number. I looked up. Faye said that Brendan's mother, who lived up in Michigan, was visiting next weekend, and they had decided she would stay in the guest room. I asked where I would be staying. Faye looked at me in a way I still think about. Not unkind exactly, more like confused, as though the question itself didn't quite make sense to her. She said they had talked about it, and since it was just for a few days, they thought I could sleep on the pullout couch in the den. The pullout couch in the den. The pullout couch in the den. At 64 years old, in the home I had helped purchase, on a mattress I had watched Brendan drag out of a storage unit, and that had a broken spring on the left side that I knew about, because I had once sat on it. I looked at my daughter for a long moment. She looked back at me. Then her phone buzzed and she glanced down at it and said, "It'll just be a few days, Mom," and walked out of the kitchen to finish getting ready. I stood in that kitchen for what must have been 2 or 3 minutes, not moving. The flour was still on the counter. Rosie came padding in with her socks and her little apron that had strawberries on it, and she looked up at me and said, "Grandma Liv, are we still making cookies?" I looked down at her. "Yes, baby," I said. "We're still making cookies. We made snickerdoodles." Rosie ate 4 of them, which I did not mention to Faye. Some things are between a grandmother and a grandchild. But that night, after Rosie was asleep, I sat in the guest room, still my guest room, for now, and I opened my notebook. I read back through every entry. Every date, every amount, every sideways request and quiet contribution. And then I did something I had not done in a long time. I called Gregory. He answered on the second ring. I could hear his wife in the background, their television. Normal life sounds. I said, I need to tell you some things. He listened without interrupting, which is a quality I have always appreciated in my son. When I finished, there was a silence, and then he said, Mom, how long has this been going on? I told him. Another silence. He said, What do you want to do? And that was the question, wasn't it? Not what should you do? Not here's what I think. Just what do you want to do? I told him I wasn't sure yet, but I told him I was going to figure it out. We talked for another hour. By the time we hung up, it was past 11. I turned off the lamp, the one with the cream shade that Leonard had chosen, and I lay in the dark for a long time. I thought about my mother. She had lived with my aunt in her final years, after my father passed. I used to visit on Sunday afternoons, and sometimes I would find her in the small room they'd given her, sitting very straight, in the chair by the window, watching the yard. She never complained, not once. I used to think that was strength. Now I wondered if it was something else. If it was just a woman who had been worn down so gradually that she had forgotten she had other options. I was not going to forget. I made a decision lying there in the dark. Not an angry decision. I want to be clear about that. It wasn't rage. It wasn't even sadness particularly. It was something quieter, more like clarity. The kind that comes when you finally stopped hoping a situation will fix itself and you understand, calmly and completely, that you are the only person who is going to fix it. The next morning I woke before 5. I dressed carefully. Good slacks. The navy blouse I'd always felt sharp in. I made myself coffee and I drank it standing at the kitchen window, watching the sky go from black to gray to that particular pale color that comes just before dawn, fully arrives. Then I picked up my bag, took my car keys from the hook by the door, and drove to my bank when it opened at 9. I sat across from a young woman named Alicia, who had kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. I told her I needed to make some changes to my accounts. I told her I needed to understand exactly what I had left and what my options were. She pulled up my information and we went through everything carefully, and she was patient and thorough, and at one point she looked at me in a way that made me think she understood more than she was saying, and she simply continued explaining my options without any unnecessary commentary. I walked out of that bank 2 hours later with a clear picture of my finances and a set of decisions made. I had spoken with Gregory again the night before. He and his wife had already looked into things on their end. He had a contact, a colleague whose mother was a real estate agent in Columbus, and he'd made a call. There was a senior living community on the east side of the city, independent living, that had a one-bedroom unit coming available in 6 weeks. Not assisted living, independent. A full apartment, my own kitchen, a little patio, a community room with organized activities if I wanted them and privacy if I didn't. Gregory had taken care of the application. I did not tell Faye any of this. I spent the next 6 weeks behaving exactly as I always had. I helped with Rosie. I cooked on the evenings Faye was tired. I made my quiet contributions to the household. I did not create drama, did not have a confrontation, did not give any indication that anything had changed. What had changed was entirely internal. I had stopped waiting to be valued. I had stopped measuring my worth by what they needed from me. I had begun the process of recovering the life that had always been mine to have. I had simply set it down for a while and forgotten to pick it back up. The morning I was set to move, I told Faye at breakfast, not as an announcement, not as an argument. I simply sat down across from her with my coffee, and I said, Faye, I found a place of my own. I'm going to be moving this weekend. She stared at me. I told her about the apartment. I told her it was close enough that I could still see Rosie regularly, which was important to me. I told her I had appreciated living with them and that I loved her and intended to continue loving her. What I did not tell her was the full accounting. The notebook, the number I had seen that morning months ago with my reading glasses and my cold coffee. I did not say those things because they would have turned the conversation into a negotiation, and I was past negotiating. Faye asked why. I looked at my daughter, this woman I had carried, raised, held through every hard thing since she was 9 years old. And I said, because I deserve a home of my own. And I think somewhere you know that. She didn't say anything. Brendan was not home that morning. That was not an accident. The move took most of Saturday. Gregory had flown in from Phoenix. He and a friend of his drove the small amount of furniture I had, some things I kept in storage, a few pieces Faye told me I could take. The lamp with the cream shade. Gregory carried boxes and made trips, and at one point stood in the middle of my new living room looking around with his hands on his hips and said, "Mom, this is really nice." It was. It was. A little patio with a view of a courtyard, morning light on the east-facing windows, a kitchen that was entirely, only, completely mine. 3 weeks after I moved out, Faye called me. I had been expecting this call, or some version of it, though I didn't know exactly what form it would take. She was not crying this time. She was quieter than usual. She said she had been thinking about things. She said she had talked to Brendan. I listened. She said that she thought she had put me in an unfair position, that she had let things go on longer than she should have, that she had not, she said, and her voice slowed here, she had not treated me the way she should have. This was not a grand apology. It was not a movie moment. She did not list every instance, and I did not ask her to. It was a quiet, imperfect acknowledgement, the kind that takes more courage than people realize, because there is no script for it and no guarantee of how it will be received. I told her that I appreciated her saying that. I told her that I loved her, that I had never stopped, that loving someone and refusing to be diminished by them are not opposing things. They can exist in the same heart at the same time, and mine had been holding both for a while now. She was quiet for a moment. Then she asked if I would come for dinner Sunday. She said Rosie had been asking about Grandma Liv. I said yes. I went on Sunday. Faye had cooked a real meal, pot roast, which had been my mother's recipe, which I had taught Faye years ago. She set the table properly. She put flowers in the center from the grocery store. Nothing expensive, just a small bunch of yellow ones. Brendan shook my hand when I arrived, which is not much, but it was something. Rosie ran to me at the door and wrapped both arms round my legs and pressed her face against me and said, "Grandma Liv, I missed you so much it was like forever." Children have a way of saying the true thing without any effort at all. We ate together. The conversation was careful in places and easy in others, the way it is when people are finding their way back to each other. Brendan talked about his work. I asked Rosie about school. Faye refilled everyone's water glass, mine included, without being asked. It was not perfect. It may never be entirely perfect. But I sat at that table with a plate of food that was the same as everyone else's, in a house I had chosen to visit rather than one I had been paying to survive in, and I felt something I had not felt in longer than I wanted to admit. I felt like myself. What I know now that I did not know 3 years ago is this: love does not require you to disappear. Generosity is not the same as surrender. And the people who truly need you, the Rosies in your life, the ones who say it was like forever, they are not asking you to shrink. They are simply asking you to stay. Staying, it turns out, looks a lot better from a place of your own. I have a little herb garden on my patio now. Basil, mint, a small rosemary bush that took a while to establish but seems to have decided to stay. In the mornings, I sit out there with my coffee before the day gets warm, and the birds come. And I think about Leonard sometimes, and I think about my mother in her chair by the window, and I think about the woman I almost let myself become. And then I drink my coffee and I go inside, and I get on with my day. Because that is what we do. We get on with it. We just have to remember finally and firmly to get on with it as ourselves. I used to think that giving was its own reward, that if you loved people openly and helped them without keeping score, The people you loved would eventually rise to meet that generosity. I believed that for a long time. I built my whole approach to family around it. What I understand now, sitting on my own patio with my coffee and my little rosemary bush that finally decided to stay, is that giving without limits doesn't teach people to value what they receive. It teaches them to expect it. There's a difference, and it took me losing a significant portion of what I'd spent 30 years building to finally see it clearly. Faye is not a bad person. I want to say that plainly, because this story is not about a villain. She is my daughter, and I love her, and some of my best memories involve watching her become a mother herself, watching her with Rosie the way I once was with her. But love, even deep, genuine love, does not automatically produce the habit of consideration that has to be practiced. And when I removed every consequence from Faye's choices by quietly absorbing the cost of all of them, I didn't protect her. I interrupted a process she needed to go through. Brendan is a separate matter. But even there, I have to be honest, I allowed it. Every time I opened my notebook and wrote down another date and another amount and said nothing, I was making a choice. Silence, I've learned, is not patience. Sometimes it's just a slower way of participating in your own diminishment. The morning I drove to the bank and sat across from Alicia with her kind eyes and her careful explanations, that was the first morning in over a year that I felt like myself again. Not the version of myself that had been managing and enduring and hoping things would improve. The original one, the woman who raised 2 children on her own income, the woman who paid off a mortgage with her own hands. That woman hadn't gone anywhere. She had just been very quiet for a while, waiting for me to remember she existed. Resilience is not the ability to withstand anything indefinitely. I used to think it was. I used to wear endurance like a virtue, but real resilience, the kind that actually carries you through, requires you to make a decision at some point. Not a dramatic one, necessarily. Mine wasn't dramatic. It was just a Tuesday morning, good slacks, a bank appointment, and a phone call to my son. But it required me to look honestly at what was happening and decide that I was worth more than I had been settling for. That is the hardest decision some of us ever make. Not because we don't know it's true, but because making it means acknowledging how long we've known and done nothing about it. Rosie told me once that my potato soup was better than anything in the whole universe. She said it with complete confidence. The way children say things that are simply, obviously, irrevocably true. Children haven't yet learned to qualify the things they love. They just say them. I think there's something in that. About saying the true thing. About knowing your own worth with that same plainness, that same ease, before anyone else has the chance to define it for you. I know mine now. Took me 64 years and a broken pull-out couch and a notebook full of numbers to get there. But I know it. And some mornings out on the patio with the birds coming in and the rosemary catching the light, that feels like exactly enough.